Hello, and thanks so much for your support of Indie Agency News. To learn more about our mission and how we're building the global home for independent agencies, go to indieagency.news. This week, we dig into the best of indie thinking. This is our show every Tuesday, and we'll have a new episode next week. But in the meantime, take a look at some of the sage wisdom from some of our members and some of the great people in our industry. I want to start with your experiences on the set, what you observed and noticed, and then to that thinking of, you know what, we can make this better. Because again, let's be honest, a lot of these sets can be very male and or very white. And so I want to start with where the gestation of the idea of we can do this better, and here's how we can do this, and here's how we can share this with the rest of the creative world.
Yeah, I'll say I think it's so inherently tied back to the kind of culture we have at the agency. It really has to start there. Like, it doesn't start on set. It like starts 10 steps back from that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I joined just a couple years ago. I've been here for about a little over 2 years now. And I went on to set, and it was like shocking how different it was. Cause I came, like you, Doug, like I came from sets like that. It was like, only one person's allowed to talk, and you got to talk, 10 people have to talk to each other to get to that one person to talk to the talent. It's just so stressful and intense and hierarchical and oftentimes like super ego driven.
Right.
And I got there, and it was just wonderful. It was organized, super organized. Everyone was very clear about their roles, responsibilities, but everybody had a voice. No one was afraid to say what needed to be said, or if they had ideas or wanted to discuss. And I think so. It really starts with kind of taking that step back and working at an organization that really values what people have to say and isn't super hierarchical and doesn't create like a scared environment where you can't kind of contribute and add. I think that's that's really like coming back. That's just like who we are at our core.
Right.
Versus the intentional way we set up a set. So I think that makes like all the difference.
I agree. I think it's that we empower people to actually be able to contribute and speak up and actually be present. There's something to be said for hierarchy in the sense of like accountability. But I think that outside of that, all of that kind of, that feeling like, someone is somehow over you, lording over you on a set is just not the way to get the best work. And it doesn't create the best environment. People need to, exactly like breathe and be able to contribute and be able to speak up. Because if they can't speak up, then you end up in a situation, not only is creativity limited, but, there could be something that you're not seeing that someone else is seeing. They're afraid to speak, so they don't. And I've seen that happen. And so, yeah, it's like being in an environment where people actually feel like they're a part of something and it's very intentional makes a huge difference on set.
You brought up some really, really great points here, and it stemmed from this Ad Age article, and I want to make sure I give requisite credit to who that was that wrote it. Lindsay Rittenhouse, my former colleague at Adweek. Love her. But it really sparked something in you to talk about mentorship. And it's one of those things that is supposed to feel intuitive, but because of the way that this industry has changed, the way that it is structured now, if we go back to some of the the work that you did with Old Spice, I mean that was still early days in digital, and it's like, oh my God, what are they doing? And now that almost feels de rigueur in a way. But things have changed to a point where whether intentionally or not, we end up in these, and they're not cliques, but they're little circles where it's you're moving around, and there isn't necessarily time to put in the effort to mentor, which, to your point, and I agree with this, is detrimental to growing great creative talent in the industry. You talked about coming from a blue collar background. Apprenticeship is the reason that those types of careers perpetuate people over time, over decades, over lifetimes. And for whatever reason, in what we do, it seems to have fallen on fallow times.
Yeah. And I don't think it's I don't know that we were ever very great at it as an industry. But it happened more naturally. And I remember when I was starting out at Wieden, and even before that at the agencies I worked before that, there was a little bit more time. Like creative directors were not stretched as thin as they are now. And so I could sit, I would have opportunities to sit for an hour with Mike Byrne and Hal Curtis and, legends, absolute legends of the industry. And I'm sitting there, I'm nobody. And I'm getting an hour of mentorship with them and just talking about the work and talking about creativity. And that was literally changed my life. But like you said, it is really hard now. It's a huge challenge for agencies. It's not for a lack of desire. It's not that agencies don't want to provide this mentorship. It's that the way the business has changed, those top people, not just in the creative department, across the board, the best talent are now stretched so thin because of the demands of agencies and the reduction in client fees and all those things. They just don't have time. Like most of them would love to, but they are running, four giant accounts. They're pitching new business. Right. They just don't have the time. And it's a massive problem because I think we do understand, but we don't. We're going to reap a terrible whirlwind in about 10 years when there's just no world-class talent or not enough to fill all the needs that there are. Because as agencies, everybody out there who's running an agency, and you've got to be able to delegate to amazing talent that really knows how to handle things, that knows how to handle a client, that knows how to get great work made or, come up with, presented, sold, and made. And that comes from being mentored by amazing people who know how to do it. And I was, so lucky. There's just zero. Watching it was fun to watch that reel and let's play it again several times.
No, we don't have 17 minutes.
But I'm looking at, honestly, the thought that was going through my head is there's no way I could have done any of this. I never imagined I could have ever been involved in not one single piece of that work.
Right.
And I never would have known how to do it if it weren't for just being exposed to absolute legends in the industry who taught me everything that I know. So,
right. We go back to like 3% and we go to, just looking at the industry in general, when we start looking in issues based, but I do like the fact that this is data led and very rational in a lot of ways. In most ways. And what I find interesting is there are all these different solar systems, these little orbits. And what I'm noticing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it starts really wide. And what I've been noticing with the two of you and the rest of your team and the rest of your, the rest of owners and people that you're interviewing, it's starting to get smaller. And so you're becoming this unifier. Not to say that there aren't other unifiers, but it feels like, similarly to a certain independent agency news thing building, it's progressing over time, and you're building it in a way that's built for sustainability as opposed to the big hit, right? So I'm curious about what you've noticed from the beginning to now and just your perception, because it is always good to pause and say, you know what? We've done a lot of great things, and we can really quantify some of these things. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll kind of jump in and say a couple things. One, I think we just kind of stepped on something, and I really have felt all along like Jean and I just kind of opened the door, and there were so many people ready to run through it.
Right.
And I would say this past summit that we had in New York is evidence of that. I mean, we had 90 women owners come from all over the United States, flew in to New York just for that. And it was sold out. I mean, there were so many women that wanted to come that we just didn't have the capacity for. So the community, it was just under the surface, and we just kind of, allowed it to come out. And I think what I believe in, like in the core of my being, is that together, Doug, we are going to go so much farther than any one of us could individually. So this community, it's like, especially in that room, like the vibe and the feel and the energy, like it is incredible. So I don't know, like, it's not like we set out with this master plan of like all of these things. We didn't. That's
why it works. That's why it works. Yeah.
We have day jobs. We both.
I know.
But I think that, like, last year we had a virtual summit. That was kind of how
I remember that.
Over 300 people attend
right.
For that. And that was when Chrissy and I also just really started to feel like there's something to this. Like, this is great. This is really good vibes. I mean, I think independent agencies specifically at times feel like we don't belong in this industry. We've all had occasions when we go to either, industry events in like New York or something. It's like, who is this for? This doesn't feel like this is for me.
Right.
And it doesn't feel like there's the camaraderie. It feels like there's the competition.
Right.
But with Own It, it's always been camaraderie, even though we do compete against each other from time to time, because we all see of like what can be in the future and how we can help other agencies continue to grow is really the overlying like vibe of it. Christy, why don't you tell the anecdote of after when the showing the enthusiasm on LinkedIn coming out of the event.
Yeah. Well, what was funny is I had somebody reach out to me and say, did you orchestrate everybody posting after the event? Was that something that you asked everybody? And I was like, no, that's just like, they're just doing it because a couple of reasons. Here's what I would say. The community is meaningful to this group. And yes, we're competing, but I would also tell you, for me, a lot of it is about lifting each other up more often than it is about competing. I mean, there have been a number of times when opportunities have come that aren't right for us, but I've passed them on to others who they are right for. So yes, we're competing, but I also think that we're, really going to work together to make progress in the industry, but also to build each other up. And that's a lot of what the Own It platform is for, to make sure that everybody can share their story so that other women can hear it in this business and know that this is possible. You can do this. You can do it differently because we're all doing it differently too. Like I've taught, every time I talk to these women, it's like, they blow my damn mind. Seriously, like they're so incredible. And that was really what we opened this summit with, was this group is making big news and big moves.
I'm curious about where you believe, and this is broad, it's a little bit of a broad construct, because there were some very specific tenets to British strategy, which felt more disciplined. As not that American strategy wasn't disciplined, but it felt more disciplined. I'm curious overall right now what you see as the state of strategy, also understanding that when we were having these conversations, there were very few platforms, this thing called the internet and digital hadn't really existed. So curious to know, with that backdrop, what you would say broadly is the state of strategy today, good, bad, and ugly.
I can go first on this one.
Sure.
So completely agree under like the different schools of planning. And I think the main difference, to be honest, is like where the strategy is let into the room or what the role of the strategy is. I think in the US, we're not bringing strategy up front as much as we should. You know, in many agencies, the strategy's job is to justify creative. And this is like the ugly truth. I'm going to say it. Like, we don't start with strategy. While in UK and I believe in New Zealand and Australia, a lot of times, like, we start with strategy. Like, we don't think creative ideas first and then try to justify that through data points or insights. And in terms of like what's happening right now, I think we may be getting too focused on metrics. I know with the digitalization of communication, you know, yes, we have so much data, but it feels like we're just chasing data to chase data and have numbers to back our asses, to be honest.
Right.
And I ask, like, many times when you ask the question, what does success look like? You get weird looks, because that's the starting point, right? You need to have a defined objective. But most of the time, we don't have a clear objective when we're starting the process. And that adds to the confusion of what are we chasing in terms of metrics.
Yeah. And I think chasing is a great word for that, because there are no standard KPIs that work for, I mean, I'm a big fan of brand lift as a KPI. I mean, I'm a huge fan of that because traffic and engagement to a certain degree can feel perishable. But when you see brand lift, that's a long view. Now we live in a short time industry where every quarter matters, which sucks on every level possible. But Alex, your thoughts on where strategy is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, just building off what Reza said, it's in this weird like friction state. And I think it comes down to what we're talking about right there, and that everything is very short-sighted and short-minded. And it feels like instead of building kind of a year-over-year thing that can grow and evolve and mold and kind of react to culture, we often get caught in like strategy is like this ultimate impact and performance lever. Like, why isn't the strategy working? Why aren't things being sold? Why aren't the widgets kind of the coolest, hottest thing? You know, the worst thing that you can tell a strategist is like, well, what we like to Reza's point about what does success look like? You know, he and I both have gotten briefs that are like, well, how do we become famous? That's not a strategy. Strategy comes and fame comes from an actual kind of like vetted, researched audience dig. And I think that all too often now, to Reza's point, also about where and when strategy is brought in, sometimes strategy just doesn't even have time to be a real strategy. It's just kind of like a substantiate this thing, find this tweet, now let's get into the work. And it's like, if you really want good strategy and you don't want just performance marketing that's going to kind of push a thing right now this week or talk about a discount, you know, you got to give it time. And, you know, even kind of going full circle to the investigative journalism piece, that's the real thing that really lacks. When you don't have time, when you don't have an idea, your strategy is just words on a page that get you to an idea. It's not actual kind of foundational thinking.
We're not here to give you a presentation. We're here to just talk. So Nilesh, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm gonna set up.
Yeah. Well, let's go back and forth. So we should unpack this a bit. The question here is why it won't kill your agency. I think I said before we got on air that I would be unflinchingly honest, because I think this is the right forum for it. And I think independent people, indie businesses deserve and appreciate honest conversations. So look, one of the questions we can ask is, was your agency already dying? You know, because AI is just the latest wave in computation. And so like essentially I feel like the business of marketing has been increasingly moving to the computer the last 60 years. And yeah, like there is an extremeness to the speed and potential capability of some of these AI models. But I think I've spent a lot of time just thinking about first principles of what this business even is. Like, what's the value of an agency? And I just cannot see a scenario where like AI is the root cause of sort of killing an agency. And what we can unpack this a bit, but like the piece that I find most fascinating and ironic is sort of like the advertising industry. You could say like the mainstream ad trade press, the leadership of, you know, large networked advertising agencies, doing this like sky is falling thing when they've essentially spent the last 30 years ignoring the arrival of all of this disruptive technology, and in my opinion, let every single one of those pitches fly over the plate. The evolution in media, the evolution of the way people consume information, the evolution from kind of like speaking brands to doing brands, each of those was picked up by an entirely different vertical. Like design agencies took a piece, consultancies took a piece. RGA and AKQA, you know, they never used to exist. They were allowed to build giant businesses and a huge ecosystem like digital agencies because ad agencies did this. And so am I surprised that there's a bit of this going on? Not at all. It feels actually like completely what I expected.
And I've talked to people who have been laid off. They have been in bad situations. There may not necessarily be in their control. That's one scenario where people, and I don't want to use the word forced because that's not really the right way to frame it, but they're in a situation where they're thinking, I could just jump over to another holding company, or I could do this, or I could do that. But then they're starting to think, oh, you know what? I could actually do this. And then there's more by choice and more of moving towards something, a goal that maybe an individual has or a group of people have. So what I want to start with, Christian, for you is, what was the situation that got you to step one in thinking about starting an agency?
It might ring true to some of the things you just mentioned about those that were laid off or are looking for their next step in their career. And I would say emotionally, frustration can be an all-time motivator. It can make you do things that you never thought were possible. I mean, I think I can speak on behalf of the other 4 partners at Outerkind, along with myself, that, you know, we just grew kind of frustrated at the fact that as you get more senior in an agency, you get further away from the things that brought you to an agency in the first place, right? Like developing kick-ass strategies, really start spending some time in a creative room with really talented professionals and building interesting and compelling ideas. You spend your time in spreadsheets and managing up and talking to your financial leadership, and who the flip wants to do that every day? I mean, that's not why we did it.
You can curse if you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my mom might be watching, and so I guess I've got to watch my P's and Q's. No, but I think frustration is really sort of the key motivator that I think got all of us thinking about that. Right. We certainly didn't do it because we thought we'd be rich or we wanted to be rich. It was really more about getting back to the roots of what made us fall in love with agency life in the first place. And I think frustration played a huge role in that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, where it is when you start, you're right on the front of it, you're in the middle of it. And then for whatever reasons, over time, you just start drifting off and fading away. And in fairness, there are people who are perfectly content with that. And I'm not here to judge at all. Yep. I mean, if that's your vibe, go for it. That's good for you. I mean, more power to you. But I do think that what I've noticed about the DNA of of people who start an agency, that they're moving towards something that has meaning. And to your point, no, you don't necessarily get in the agency business to make money, but there is that starting point. So we have this scenario of the situation that that compelled you and your partners to move to building Outerkind. What were your initial thoughts from the emotional side of it? Because there's fear, there's excitement, there's anxiety, there's a wide range of emotions that one goes through, and yes, there are the practical considerations for that. I'm curious to better understand emotionally where you and your partners were from the onset of, okay, we're doing this.
Well, I mean, it's important for context in this respect. This is November of 2020, and you've got a number of us together in the midst of a pandemic thinking, yeah, it seems like a really wise idea to start a marketing agency with a heavy background in live experience and experiential, by the way, at a time when nothing, and I mean nothing, was happening at that time. And so you had all the stresses, first and foremost, of a pandemic. Second, of, you're in this transitional phase anyway of learning that meetings can actually be done on Zoom with clients where you used to fly across the country, for 1 hour meetings. And in the midst of all that, you're saying, yeah, this seems like a really great idea. And so the initial thoughts were, honestly, on the positive side, you mentioned a lot of the negatives, which were all omnipresent. But I think we all resigned ourselves to the fact that sometimes the window just cracks open, and you can't line up perfection with everything. You can line up a lot of ambition. You can line up a lot of determination and drive and trust, but you can't line up perfection. And so I say that because of how you started this conversation with those that are sitting on the sidelines perhaps today, or maybe not even on the sidelines. They're just like, oh, it's not the right time. Maybe in a year when the election's over, or maybe when, something else happens in my life that sort of is the protagonist for me to start this. Yeah, I got to tell you, it's never going to be perfect. And it certainly wasn't in our case, but the emotional side of things were all of the negative things you said. But there was this unbridled enthusiasm and excitement of building something from nothing. Literally in my garage, in my house, hosting our first meeting in November of 2020 and going, okay, we're doing this, but make sure we're 10 feet apart because, that whole pandemic thing. It's just unbelievable to think back to that time.
When we talk about some biases too, we've heard a lot about digital bias, technology bias, the algorithms that are designed by, white men, and that bias. And so, interesting. Obviously, intuitively, we know that there is going to be creative bias. We've seen it in the work. We've seen it in the work over the years. But now it's really about digging into this a bit deeper.
Yeah.
So what is creative bias?
Well, there's a definition there that you can see. And I'm going to touch on the AI later in this deck.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I have examples, real life examples of what AI does to us, basically. But the definition, it's this, right? But the main point is that it relies on assumptions that about groups of people rather than the truth, right?
Yep.
So if you go to the next one, and I want to touch, there's intentional overt bias, which is advertisers push a perspective. The most important here is the covert, the unintentional. Mm-hmm. It's the bias that it's ingrained in us.
Yes.
Because we make the decisions, right? I mean, with the intentional, we can advise the advertisers, well, you know what, you shouldn't do this because of that. But we need to get better at ourselves. And that's why I touch on the unintentional, on the covert, which is more dangerous than the other one. So, and for example, the confirmation bias is one that that probably is one of the most common. And it's, we have our beliefs. Here are the facts and the evidence, and we don't want to if we don't agree with the facts and evidence, we don't want to hear that. We just want to believe what we believe. So we look for, there's a cartoon, right? There's a cartoon next to the next slide, or no? Yeah, that it's so perfect because let me research, right? Let me research this, and then you go to look, and the first thing that you see that supports your thought, you said, okay, there you go, I'm right. That's not the case. What you need to do is do research, real research, and as I say, you need to prove yourself wrong.
That's the kicker right there.
That's the kicker. And
but nobody wants to necessarily do that.
No,
right?
No, but I mean, we are in communications, we're in marketing. We need to do the research. We need to be curious, right? That's the point that kills me.
Is part of it moving too fast? Like, we move too fast.
Yeah, that's true. But we should, I mean, again, that's where the old school thinking needs to be in place. Okay, he said, you know what, stop the ball right here, let's think about it. Those 10, 15, 30 minutes that you think about and you stop things could save you a nightmare.
So as we look through the process of pitching, and we all know that pitching is broken. My contention, and again, I always like to take procurement out of it. It's my contention that the chemistry session should be first. And it's a situation where it's like, yeah, you know what? I see your creds. I see all that. I can get an idea of what you're good at. But where does the chemistry, where does chemistry fit with you? Because you're such a unique and interesting and interested individual. You have this innate curiosity. So it occurs to me that the chemistry session for you, or just chemistry in general, you probably put a big premium on that.
It's a huge premium for me, because I'm not worried. I worry less about what the solution is and more how people work together. Because if we get along really well and you're smart folks in a room, you're going to find the solution.
Yeah.
So for me, as I'm going through my process, I encourage folks to include me in the process as they're thinking through their process and how they might attract or attack a piece of business. And I'm very clear with, if you need me, I'm there. And there's no whatever you say to me is not a penalty. It's at all. And I invite you to call me up on a Thursday at 2 p.m. and say, Russell, we were just thinking this thing and we don't know if it has any legs or not, but here's a tendril of an idea, and how does it land? And those moments to me are the moments that make the huge difference. The folks who go off into another corner, especially how I like to work, I invite people to bring me into the process. I know a lot of other folks don't like that.
Right.
I'm not a black box kind of person like that. But for me, when I make that invitation, it's a sincere invitation. It's not a,
right. Lip service.
It's not a bullshit invitation. It's sincere because I'm invested. And the folks who take advantage of that is a real premium in my book. And it allows me to see how people think. It allows some course correction and also allows for some just freaking crazy land to happen. Where you can't quite get it on a pitch deck, but let me talk about a thing. And sometimes a little gem of an idea is sitting in that thing, and it actually creates the campaign.